Everyone, and welcome to the first week of the Practical R+Git workflow for scientist workshops for 2022. My name is Eli Holmes. I am a research scientist at the Northwest Fisheries Science Center in Seattle, Washington, and I'll be teaching these sessions for the next 4 Fridays. Then we take off 2 weeks. Then we'll do 4 Fridays after that. Normally, I'll be posting recordings from the live WebEx sessions. However, during the first week, we had some technical difficulties and I wasn't able to record, so I am doing a separate recording of the session, so there'll be video of this. So first, a few logistics. This is the website for the workshops, and it's our verse tutorials, our workflow, Northwest Fisheries Science Center 2022. And each week, if you scroll down, you'll see the topics that I'm going to cover, and I may change the topics just a little bit. Like if I don't get through everything one week, I'll move that to the next week. That's happening a little bit for the May 27th session. And you also see a link to the notes. And these are the notes so that you can go back through everything that I cover. But mainly when during the live session, I'm going to be showing you what is written in the notes. So we click there. So this is week 1. And I've also put in these notes, as you scroll down, you'll see there'll be places where I say, show me. I made little videos of some of the skills, and you can just click that and watch that on YouTube, seeing how to do that. All right, so let's jump right in. And this week, I'm going to be introducing you to some basic skills for working with Git and GitHub to make an easy entry into this for you. I'll be using GitHub Desktop. And I use GitHub Desktop because it makes working with Git and GitHub a lot simpler and actually quite a bit faster, I find. I have to manage a lot of repositories, and GitHub Desktop just makes it really easy for me. Someone who, I could work from the command line, but it's just so much faster to work from GitHub Desktop, an interface to Git and GitHub. In the notes, however, you're going to see links to show me for other ways that you could other ways you could do the skills using other methods. For example, how you could do the same skills I'm going to be showing you from the terminal, or from RStudio, or from Visual Studio Code. I recommend that you click through some of those, even if you're not going to work from the shell. I think it can help your learning to understand what's going on a little better if you see it done on a different platform. So with that, let's jump right in. So let's start with some definitions. Git. What is Git? Git's a program that is going to track your file changes in a repository. A repository you can think of like a folder on your file system, but it's got a little hidden folder in it, and that little hidden folder it's kind of like a history book. You keep track of all your changes, and that's going to allow Git to let you sort of look back at the status of your files in the past. GitHub is a website server that will host these repositories for you in the cloud, so that you can have one version that's up in the cloud that you could share with collaborators, say, either public or private, and then you will have a local copy of that repository on your local machine where you work. Basic Git jargon. You're going to hear these terms over and over again. Repo, that means the repository. That is, you think of it like your folder with your code in it. We're going to see how to create that in just a moment. Then there are 3 common actions. There are more actions than this, but these are the ones we're going to be focusing on today. And these are the most common ones that you will use. First is commit. When we say commit, that means that we write a little note about the change that we've made to our code, and we commit that note in the repository record. Push means to push changes on our local computer up to the remote version on the repository. In this case, on that remote repository is going to be on GitHub. So we're pushing changes from our local computer up to GitHub. Pull means we're pulling from the remote repository, in this case on GitHub, and we're pulling those changes down to our local computer, local repository. A Git GUI is a graphical interface to work with Git. And Git's a command line program, and the GUI is allowing us to work with Git and GitHub without working on the command line. There are a lot of different ones that you can use. I use GitHub Desktop. I teach with GitHub Desktop. I also use other ones depending on what I'm doing. I guess when I'm working in R, I'd be using RStudio. If I'm working in Python, Visual Studio Code. If I'm working on Jupyter Hub, I'll use a different one. But today I'm going to be working with GitHub Desktop. I recommend it. It's a real nice product. So today I'm going to be covering the 4 basic Git and GitHub skills that are really all you'll need to know in the beginning. And for most people, this will actually cover 95% of your work. For the other 5%, I'm going to cover that next week. All right, so workflows. I'm going to be teaching what's called a very simple trunk-based workflow with no branches. And it looks like this. Here, this diagram down here. So we're going to make a change to a file on our computer in a Git repository. Then we're going to commit that change, meaning we're going to write a little note about what we did and then commit it, the change. So make a little note in the Git history book. Then we're going to make some more changes, and then we'll write another note. We may do that multiple times, and then we push the change up to GitHub. And then we repeat, and we just do that all day long. If you were to Google Git, you almost certainly would see some image kind of like this right here. And this is referred to as, it's like a Git flow workflow. So I'm not going to cover that. And actually, if you, in the future, as you're getting more comfortable with Git, if you start thinking about working with Git branches, before you really commit to sort of going from really a simple trunk, simple kind of workflow like this, so you're only working on, you're just working on your files. You don't have like a branch, a copy of your files. They're called branches in Git. So do a little research on that. This style down here is actually not as popular within like the software industry because this style is kind of prone to causing a lot of merge conflicts. Okay, so that was going a little bit into the weeds there. But let's keep moving forward. And so the first thing that we need to do after downloading GitHub Desktop and making a GitHub account, so the first thing we need to do is to set a few preference things on GitHub Desktop. I showed a little video here where I show this. You can watch that. I'm going to kind of demo it here. I'm not completely doing it because I'm already logged in, but I'll show you where you need to go when you first open this up. So this is what GitHub Desktop looks like. And if you go up here and you see preferences, so first thing is you click this Git part, and you need to give it your name, and I guess I should give it my full name here, and your email, and this will be shown as the default. You don't need to change that, so save that. Oh, okay, so that's the first thing you'll do, and then the next thing that you need to do is when you see this, you're going to be signed out. So you're going to need to sign in. You just click that. It'll take you to the browser, and then you can sign into your GitHub account. And then you're good to go. You don't need to do anything else. So if you've done this, say, in RStudio, and you're used to like, oh, you have to come up with a personal access token, that kind of thing, you don't have to do that with GitHub Desktop. All you do is log in right here, and that's it. You're good to go. All right, that's the setup. And now let's hop in to doing some things. So as I said, there are 4 key skills. First skill, and they're all really easy skills. First skill, you're going to create a blank repository on GitHub. So let's go do that. So here I am in my GitHub account. I've got GitHub, and then EEHolmes right there, that's me. And I want to create a blank repository, and they kind of hide it up here. You'd think they'd do like a big green button, but no, it's this little plus over here. So go here and click New Repository. You can ignore this template part. So give it a name. I'm going to call it test. It's public. That's good because we're doing this for the class. This is the important thing. We need to add the README file. We could actually add any file, but our option here is just to add a README. So we're going to click that. That's important. You need to click that. Add.gitignore. So what this is a file where you can tell Git what files on your local computer that are in the folder that you don't want pushed up to GitHub. And sometimes you will have files like that. We won't be using this in the workshop today. However, this is a standard thing that you're going to want, so you should generally pick one. And it doesn't really matter really all that much what template you use here, but you can save yourself a little time if you pick the one that's most suited to whatever your repository is for. So let's say I'm doing one where I'm using R. I'm going to click that. That's it. I don't need to do the license. And there we go. That was skill 1. I have created a repository on GitHub. You can see it just has 2 files. This .gitignore file. Let me just click that. It's just telling it what files that not to push up to GitHub from my local computer. And then it has this README, which really just has test in there. Okay, so I can jump around. I can look at the files. All right, so that's skill 1. Next, let's go to skill number 2. Skill number 2, we will clone our GitHub repository onto our computer. So let me define what clone means here. So clone is a special kind of copy. Our repository, we can think of our repository structure like this. We've got this main repository that's up in the cloud. That's what is called origin. And we make copies, clones of that, onto our local computer. I can do it onto multiple local computers. So you can imagine I could have multiple clones. And these copies are special because they're linked to the version that's up in the cloud, and you can push and pull directly between these. So this black one can pull directly from the red one, and the black one can push changes directly up to the red one. So that's how clones work, and that's how they're special, because they can push and pull directly between each other. So let's see how to clone that repository we just made on the GitHub repo onto our local computer. Okay. So I'm going to do this in GitHub Desktop. You can look through the notes and see how to do this skill in other ways also, like in the terminal. First step, I want to copy the URL. This is going to be the first step for whatever way you make the clone. So copy that URL here. And then I want to go to GitHub Desktop. Here I'm back in GitHub Desktop. Go to File and Clone Repository. So I'm making a copy of the repository that is on GitHub. So if we go over here, we see URL. What is this one doing? Well, this would populate them. You know, it will look, and I suppose it's probably there somewhere. But I think just hopping over to URL is the most general way to do it. This will work for any repository, your own or somebody else's. So we just paste that URL there. The next thing, what we want to do before we just go and hit that blue button, we want to look and make sure that we are putting the repository in the right place. So what does it mean in the right place? Well, you could put the cloned repository in any place you wanted. However, Git repositories are special. They have that hidden .git file, and as we'll learn next week, they behave a little bit differently than your regular folders on your computer. And it will be very helpful, very, very helpful, if you always put your Git repositories in the same place. So you can always find them, and you know that everything that's there in that location is a Git repository. So for me personally, how I do it is in my documents folder, I have a folder called GitHub, and that's where I always clone my repositories into. So I will always want this local path to be users EEHolmes, documents, GitHub, and then the name of the repository. Now I can clone. Great. So now you see the name of the repository here. And if we say history, we see it has an initial commit. We can see that it has the .git ignore, and plus means it was added, and the README, it shows that there was a README file added. All it has there is test. So now let's go over and look at the file folder. So as I said, on my computer, I always have it in my documents, and this folder, GitHub, only has GitHub repositories. You can see I have quite a few. So here it is, test, right there. Let's double click on that, and there we go. We've got our README file, our .git ignore file. So I'm on a Mac, and I have all my folders set so that I can see the hidden files and folders. If you didn't, you'd probably just see this, just README. I find it helpful to set up my folders so I see the hidden folders. That way it's like immediately apparent if I were to forget whether or not this was a Git repository, I would see this .git and I would know, it is. The other reason is this .git ignore file is something you want to edit. You don't want to futz around with this folder here. Okay, so there we go. We copied that repository onto our local computer. That's skill 2. So next, we want to open that repository in whatever platform you're going to use to edit files. I'm going to open it up in RStudio. I could open it up in just a plain text editor. If this was a Python project, I'd be opening up in Visual Studio Code. If it was full of Excel files, I would be opening it up with Excel. So just however you want to open up the files, it really doesn't matter. Just open them up. And then we're going to jump to skill 3. We're going to make some changes and commit those local changes. So here we go. So actually, let me just go here. I'll start from scratch here. It's unhappy because I'm trying to open a project that I had deleted. Okay, so here I'm in RStudio. So in RStudio, I do it like this. GitHub test. Okay. All right, so now I've opened this up in RStudio, and remember, like I said, this particular skill of editing files and committing them, it's not in any way RStudio specific. You edit them however you want. Okay, so I'm going to open up that README, and I'm going to make a change. A first change, and then I'm going to save it. So now let's hop back over to GitHub Desktop. Now I'm on GitHub Desktop, and you can see, I have 2 changes. Well, the first one here, a test proj, is because I have created a RStudio project, and it creates this little file that has the state of the project. That's okay. And then I have this README, and you can see it tells me what the change was right there, a first change. Excellent. So now I'm going to uncheck these. The first thing that I need to do is I need to tell Git, I'm going to write a little comment about the change, and I need to tell Git which files I want this little note to apply to. So I could select both of these and say, I'm saying this little note I'm about to write is going to apply to both of these files. So this note is a change related to 2 files. Or I could do 2 separate notes, one for the README, and then after that's done, a different one for test proj. This sort of checking the little box, Git has a special term for this process. It's called staging. In GitHub Desktop, you don't really need to know that word staging, but if you use different GUIs, you'll see that you have to, it's going to have like little icons that say, stage. Okay. So let's do two separate ones. So first one, I'm going to say create a RStudio proj file. The note can be whatever you want. Okay, and so I committed that. And this one, I'm going to say add a line. There we go. Commit that. And now I clicked over to the history, and now I can see, so the history is basically like this little book that is describing everything that's changed to the files. So I can go back at any point in time and look at what the change was. So look here, I can see, okay, that added one file. What was going on here? That just added a line here. Okay, great. Well, let's go back over to RStudio and let's add another line. Change, there we go. And let's add an R script. Okay, that's our little R script, and we're going to call this hello.r. Now we jump back over to GitHub desktop, and we see, we've made two changes, and we can go back and look. This one has added that. This one has added this change. And this time, let's just let it check both of these. I'll just show you how this works. So now the comment I'm going to put in here is added a hello script plus some readme lines. Okay. So, because I'm teaching here, I'm adding some little notes here about the changes that are, they're really quite, obviously quite minimal. When I was first starting, I really kind of agonized a little bit over what should I write for the note? Or sometimes I would always write just really minimal stuff because I was just in a hurry. So if you're doing real work, the point of the note here is for your future self to know what that change was about. So try to think about what will help you when you look back in the history. Some changes are so minimal, you can just say minimal, like there's nothing interesting here. And then others will be here's where I was doing XYZ. You've got this description here, and you could add more information here about what this change is dealing with. And so, for example, if you were fixing a bug, you might write, what that was about. And again, the key here is that you're writing this note for your future self. And your future self may need to search for when a change was introduced. So, that's what you want to think about. Also, if you're working on something and with colleagues, it will be really helpful for them to have a little information about what change you just did. Okay, so there you go. I committed it. Okay, so that's it. That was skill 3. Wow, we're almost done. So we've created a blank repo, we cloned that repo onto our computer, and now we've started making changes to our code just like we normally would, if we were working along, and then periodically we commit those local changes. So we're going to write that in the history book. Another common sort of question that you'll have is for yourself is, how often should I be committing changes? Well, the nice things about Git, working with Git, is that you can always go back in time when you have Git. So I can go back here and I could look at the status of the repository at this state, before these commits. I could look at it at this state. So that's one nice thing, but you can only do that at each commit. So if you do tons and tons of work before you add a commit, well, you don't have the ability to go back in history very finely. The other thing is that once you do a commit, it's going to be easy to revert the changes. So if I had this change here and I decide, oh, I don't like that at all, I just right click and I say revert. So get rid of that change. So if you only do a commit at the end of the day, well, your option is to revert a whole day's work, which that could make you less efficient if you use that strategy. You can, but you're not going to have the feature of being able to sort of go back a few hours. And the other thing that I find personally is if I were to commit only at the end of the day, at the end of the day, I'd be like, God, what was I working on? Wait, I kind of forget, a day's pretty long. So I personally am every time I finish a little task and I break my work up into pretty small tasks. As soon as I first finish a task, I'll commit that, write a little note. Yep. Okay, so now let's go to the last skill. Push the changes up to GitHub. Well, this one is super easy. So I have the changes. You see these little arrows? That is telling me that these have not been pushed up to GitHub yet. If I look up here, I see push origin and 3. So what that's saying, origin is the one that's on GitHub, and push, so I'm pushing up to GitHub. So let's go check out GitHub before I do this. Okay, so README still looks like this, and all I have here is the .gitignore. So let's do the push. And we need to reload it. Aha, there we go. We've got a few more lines. And we have these extra files. So what about pulling? So let's see how to commit changes directly on GitHub and then pull those locally. So you see, when I'm on this README here, I can go here. And if I'm working on something that's just a text file, I'm going to have this little edit this file thing. I can go there, and now I can edit it directly. So a change on GitHub. There we go. Commit the changes, just like usual. Add a line from GitHub. Commit the changes. There we go. If we go back to test, we see this. We see that change right here. On GitHub, our little history is over here, this little clock icon. It says the 5 commits. And we can see all the changes. We look at that on GitHub. A nice little feature on GitHub too, and that will be very handy for your work, is that you see this little bit over here? It says browse the repository at this point in time. This is a super nice feature, and you'll find this really handy when you're working on something and you're like, oh wow, when did I introduce that change? What was I doing? And sometimes you make a lot of changes to a file and you're like, oh, I didn't like that. I want to go back to a version. Go back to something I had in the file, some previous point in time. So let's see, initial commit. Yeah, let's go and check it out. So I can just click this. And you can see now this is the version of what the repository looked like at that initial commit. This is obviously really simple, but you can imagine something really complicated with lots of different files. And you can just go around and snoop around and see exactly what it looked like at that point in time. Now let's go, let's just, I think I can just do that. I don't know. I could click this, but I think I usually just go back and do that. Okay. All right, so now we've got a change on GitHub, but that's not on our local computer. So here I'm back in GitHub Desktop, and it doesn't give me any indication that there's a change up on GitHub. If I waited long enough, it would, GitHub Desktop, it sort of pings. It pings the origin periodically. And if I waited long enough, I don't know how long it takes, maybe 5 minutes, I would see something pop up here to tell me that there was a change on GitHub. But instead of waiting, I can just say fetch origin. And when it says fetch origin, that makes it sound like it's actually like pulling it down, but it's not pulling it down yet. It's just going and pinging and saying, hey, do you have any changes that aren't on the local computer? And yes. So it shows there's one change on GitHub that I haven't pulled down. So to pull, I just click that. There we go. And now if I look here, and remember that change was the README file, so I pulled in that change on GitHub. All right, so that's your 4 basic skills. And I think with these 4 skills, I worked maybe for 2 years doing intensive coding projects just with those 4 skills. All you really need to do is, when you're starting, and, this will serve you well for a long time, is just you make the change on your local computer, you commit those changes, and then push up to GitHub, and then pull down to GitHub if you happen to have made a change directly on GitHub. Now I want to show you 2 corollary skills from that you can use during using the skills that you've just learned to do something that we commonly want to do. So a really nice thing about GitHub is that you can share your code, and you can also use code that other people have shared. Now, you've maybe heard of something called forking. And forking is if you made a copy of somebody's repository, but you left in the link to where you copied it from. So and by having that link, you could pull in changes, if they made more changes to their repository, you could pull those in. And conversely, if you made a change on yours and you wanted to offer them to accept this change, you could do something called a pull request. And then they could merge your changes in. So it creates this kind of link between 2 repositories. However, in my experience, that's a common thing to need to do, like if you're collaborating. But if, say, you're working alone, so you're not in a collaboration situation, the more typical thing that you're going to want to do is copy somebody's repository on GitHub and then use it as a template for something that you want to do. So, for example, let's say you saw somebody's website that they had made using a GitHub repo. You could copy their repo, use all the structure that makes the website, like all the machinery, and just change the content. So let's see how we can use the skills we've just learned in order to do that on GitHub. Okay, so let's copy. So first step, remember we want to We want to make a repository. So this is basically skill 1. We're going to create this repository on GitHub, but it's a little bit slightly different version. So we're going to copy the URL. And now we need to create this repository on GitHub. And remember last time we said new repository? Well, we don't want new. We want to make this copy. And in GitHub, they call it import. So I don't really like that verb. That's what they call it. So we put it here, put the URL here. And now I need to give it a new name because I'm making a copy of this. I can't call it test because that one I already have that one. So in this case, the URL is coming from my own account, EEHolmes, but I could put the URL of any repository here. It doesn't matter. Just grab anyone's public repository, paste the URL here, and then I can make a copy of that. So, but here I'm using something of my own here, so I have to give it a different name. And then I just say begin import. Okay, so now that it's imported, and let me know that it was done, I can now go to that test3 repository, and you can see here it has all these, all the files there. So now I can use the skills that we've learned to clone this onto my local computer. So I'm going to go back to GitHub Desktop, File, Clone Repository. I already have the URL here. I paste the URL in. I double check that it's going to the right place, and I clone. So now I have it. If I go into my file system, I see it right here, test3. Okay, so imagine, the case that I was saying, like it's somebody else's repository and I just want to adapt it. So first thing I want to do is get rid of this proj file because that was from the test. Let's say, I didn't want that. All I really wanted out of this was this, the README, let's say. And then I want to add in something. Let's say I was here, and what's in here? Okay, and I wanted to add some files from somewhere else. I don't know. I wanted to add in this data folder. There we go. Okay, so now I've added whatever things I want into this repository. I've taken what I want from the thing I've copied, and then I've put in the new things that I want. And now I go up to GitHub Desktop, and I am going to commit all the changes. So I'm deleting these two, and then I'm adding this. So add files for, let's see. There we go. That's it. So I just used those skills 2, 3, and 4 to make some edits to that, and then so clone it, make some edits, commit that, and then push that up to GitHub. And now when we go back over here, if I refresh this, you're going to see there I've got that data that I just put in, and then I have the README. So this example is a little bit contrived in that, using this very simple repository, but you can imagine that, if I were copying like something that's much more complex, a website with all these different files. So I would clone that back onto my local computer and then, edit all the content. The key thing to note here is that this repository has no connection whatsoever to the original repository that I copied from. So for example, there's no way for me to contribute to test, which is what I copied this from. It would be different if I did a fork. If I did a fork, you would see listed here, up here, you would see where this came from, and there'd be a mechanism for me to do what's called a pull request to merge changes here back to the repository that I copied from. But if we import, we don't have that connection. Okay, I'm going to stop there, and next week I will introduce you to using branches and how to resolve what are called merge conflicts.